Terra Arcanum is a world filled with wonder. From the four planes to the mysterious abyss, nearly everything has a story to tell. But to learn more about this fantastic world, we need to dive deeper than the books and the tabletop RPG. Join me as we reveal the secrets of Terra Arcanum. In a solar system, light years away from Keldraxis, another planet, Nuname, took form some hundreds of thousands of years after the Elder Daemon first set his plans of domination into motion. This planet was small, about the size of our Mercury. It was jagged, rough, and covered in spires and mountains that breached the cloud tops. And on this sharp yet hospitable world, the Nuname took form. As they developed and grew, they formed a democratic society, with each member getting a vote in how they would progress their laws and rules. One of these Nuname, Yavin, won several elections in a row, rising from the position of Squealub, or secretary in the common tongue, to Falslo, or supreme leader in the Terran language. His time in power is recorded as a golden age for the Nuname. Yavin maintained the peace between Niwael and Orgons, when all thought that the Great Unity would shatter. His push to improve underdeveloped areas and provide affordable homes led to the smallest percentage of homelessness ever seen, and he ratified the new education system that remains in effect to this day, among many of his other achievements. But this position was not permanent. Falslo served for the Terran equivalent of 2,000 years, after which there was another vote to elect a new Falslo. On top of that, each Nuname could only ever serve as Falslo once. Yavin knew his time was coming up, and he would never again hold this kind of power. So he put into motion a plan that would enable him to gain eternal power. He gathered his most trusted friends, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Selephiel, Urendiel, and Barakel, and together they began a plot to keep as much power for themselves as they could. As his term closed in on his last 150 years, Yevon began to spread word of his new, some might call radical, ideas on how to improve the Nuname's government. Backed by Uriel, Selephiel, and Michael, he started adding new positions that seemed necessary after he explained them, but only really served to create a confusing network of offices that needed more positions to oversee them. He then proposed that redundant offices be removed to prevent so much confusion, and with the people's vote, he removed many of the older offices, moving their duties over to his new officials. Now that the political system left Nuname unfamiliar with politics, unsure of what each position did, Yevon proposed that they move from a democracy to a republic. This time he made sure Barakel, Gabriel, and Raphael supported him, while Michael and Uriel agreed to oppose his idea. But this was under the guise that they would come around to his side toward the voting date, swinging more votes in his favor. He claimed that this would make it easier for everyone, especially for those who didn't understand how all the positions worked, and despite many critics and warnings from those in power, the bill was ultimately passed, and Nanam became a republic. With only 68 years left in his term, Yevon put the next phase of his plan into action. With Sephael, Barakel, Raphael, and Gabriel throwing in their support, he made another proposal. A new position would be made that would act as judicator for many of the offices that now existed. Once again, despite the warnings and critics, Yevon managed to get his bill passed, thanks in large part to the efforts of Uriel, Udiel, and Michael, who shot down many of his objectors. The new office of Falslo Squealub was born merely 2 years before Yevon's term was over. He immediately ran for the office and won the position in a landslide victory. Now, with his newly created position where even the Falslo had to submit any bills and or amendments that he wanted to propose, and his friends in strategically placed positions, Yevon enacted the final part of his grand plan. He extorted the other officials and got an amendment that made his position a lifelong term. Satisfied with his new power, Yevon settled into his role and began what many claim to be his rule over Nanam. Yet, despite the cries of corruption and tarnishing of his name by critics, Yevon was still ultimately loved by the citizens. In his role as Falslo Squealub, Yevon continued his projects, closing the gap between the classes, ensuring everyone had food and housing, and maintaining the peace between provinces. One night, while on holiday, Yevon lay back, gazing up at the stars. He recalled how so many Nuname had tried to fly up and touch them, but none had ever succeeded. It was on that night that Yevon knew what would truly cement his legacy. He would orchestrate the process that would allow his people to reach the stars. Following his return to office, Yevon wasted no time in drawing up plans to create an organization whose whole purpose would be to get into space. Again he was met by critics, and again he persevered with his associates until the Nuname Astronomical Research and Development Association, or NARDA, was born. Over the course of almost 50 Terran years, the NARDA reached the small rock Yagel, orbiting the planet Nunam. As research continued, they soon had probes traveling out into deep space and had reached other planets within their own solar system. But again, Yevon began to feel he needed to do more. So he once again found himself staring off into the starry night, trying to figure out what he could do next. With a sigh, he looked down and saw in the streets below a lone Nuname holding up a sign that read, "We are not alone."